Cook County Jail isn't just America's biggest jail, it's the most unpredictable. Behind these walls, inmates run businesses, guards walk a razor-thin line between survival and collapse, and secrets slip through the system like water through cracked concrete. Today, we're stepping into a world where power shifts by the minute, and one mistake can ignite chaos that echoes across Chicago. Before we dive deep into this unbelievable story, make sure you hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and join our growing community of viewers who love real stories from behind the walls. Trust me, you don't want to miss what comes next. Cook County Jail sits like a concrete giant on Chicago's southwest side, a sprawling compound of 96 acres. From above, it looks organized, structured blocks, razor wire looping neatly around the perimeter, and guard towers scanning every direction. But appearances lie. Inside, this place is a living organism, shifting, bending, adapting to forces that most jails would collapse under. In most facilities, the environment is controlled, movement is predictable, routines are strict, and hierarchy is enforced top-down. But Cook County is a different beast entirely. Housing more than 7,000 inmates on an average day, sometimes shooting past 8,000, it is too big, too busy, and too chaotic for any single system to fully contain. And everybody inside knows it. To understand why this jail has the biggest security holes in America, you have to start with the foundation. Cook County wasn't designed to be what it is now. It grew piece by piece, decade after decade, expanding whenever crime rose or court backlogs exploded. Old buildings were patched up instead of replaced. New divisions were squeezed into tight spaces. Hallways doubled as holding areas. Classrooms became dorms. Storage rooms became temporary cells, which eventually became permanent. Every brick tells a story of improvisation. Every door carries the scars of previous incidents, fights, riots, escapes, or simply years of overuse. Guards joke that the jail has lived several lives, but beneath the humor is a quiet fear. A facility this old and this overwhelmed can't keep up forever. Overcrowding is the heart of Cook County's chaos. Some divisions were built for 1,000 inmates but regularly housed 1,800. Dormitory-style rooms meant to hold 20 men would suddenly have 40. Bunk beds were stacked higher. Mattresses lined the floors. Tensions simmered like a pressure cooker, and the staff knew that any small argument could turn into an all-out war. But the real danger wasn't just the numbers, it was the blend of people trapped inside. Unlike prisons, which separate inmates by sentence length or crime severity, jails lump everyone together. At Cook County, a teenager awaiting trial for shoplifting might be housed next to a seasoned gang leader facing life for murder. A homeless man picked up for trespassing might be eating lunch beside a high-ranking cartel enforcer. One wrong placement could shift the balance of a whole tier. And the guards? Their job wasn't to control the jail. It was simply to survive it. Most correctional officers at Cook County will admit something that no official report ever says out loud: inmates often have more influence over daily life than staff. With the population so massive and the ratio so uneven, officers learn quickly that negotiation works better than force. You can't police 150 men with anger. You need relationships, or alliances. Some guards walk the thin line between friendly and fearful. Others openly rely on tear-shot callers to keep order. It's an unspoken agreement: you control your guys, and I'll keep my distance. But this arrangement comes at a price. When inmates run the day-to-day rules, it becomes easy to hide things: contraband, weapons, communication networks, and power structures that reach far beyond the walls. That's where Cook County's security holes begin to show. To the public, security holes sound like smuggled phones and broken cameras. But in reality, they're deeper. They're structural, cultural, systemic. The jail wasn't just leaking, it was bleeding information, influence, and opportunity. From the moment an inmate stepped through intake, they were already learning how to navigate weaknesses: which officers looked the other way, which hallways had blind spots, which doors didn't fully latch unless slammed. And the staff? Many were exhausted. Some were new. Others were jaded. When a work shift feels like a battlefield, you stop noticing cracks in the armor even as they widen every day. Cook County Jail wasn't just a facility. It was a storm. And every storm begins with a shift in the wind, a subtle warning that change is coming. That warning was about to arrive. A single incident, one that would expose just how fragile the jail's security truly was now quietly unfolding inside Division 9, the most feared building on the entire property. But before we get there, we need to understand the enemy forming inside the walls. Division 9 was unlike any other block in Cook County Jail. If the rest of the jail was a city, Division 9 was its underground black market, its beating heart of power, fear, and survival. The walls weren't just concrete, they were a ledger of unspoken rules, secret alliances, and invisible hierarchies. Every inch had been claimed by someone, every corridor mapped by inmates who had lived there long enough to understand its rhythms and weak points. The day started like any other in Division 9, a tense mix of monotony and anticipation. Morning counts echoed off the high ceilings, guards scanning, recording, verifying, but the inmates already knew the numbers didn't matter. What mattered was influence. Who controlled the showers? Who ran the commissary trades? Who held grudges that could explode into violence at any moment? Within these walls, control wasn't given, it was earned, often violently. At 6:30 a.m., Officer James "Jimmy" Fletcher did his rounds. A veteran with 20 years on the job, Fletcher had learned to walk the line between authority and survival. He knew that in Division 9, the smartest inmates weren't the ones who followed the rules, they were the ones who bent them without getting caught. That morning, he noticed a new tension in the air, something subtle yet unmistakable: murmurs in corners, quick glances exchanged across the tiers, and the sudden, uneasy silence that always came before a fight. And then it happened. A commotion erupted in cell 24, near the far end of the tier. At first, it was just a shout, muffled and confused. But within seconds, the noise escalated: chairs clanging against metal, feet pounding the floors, curses flying like bullets. Fletcher sprinted down the corridor, keys rattling, baton in hand. By the time he reached the cell, 3 inmates were on the ground in a brutal struggle, another 2 circling like predators waiting for an opening. The fight had started over a stolen pack of cigarettes, but it quickly became clear this was more than a petty quarrel, it was a test of dominance. In Division 9, dominance wasn't just about intimidation, it was survival. The inmate who controlled a tier could control the flow of contraband, the distribution of privileges, and even the morale of the guards. Losing respect meant losing protection, and losing protection often meant getting hurt, or worse. Fletcher called for backup, but it wasn't coming fast enough. The jail was overcrowded, understaffed, and every officer was stretched thin. As he tried to break up the fight, he realized just how fragile the order really was. 1 second, the inmates were contained; the next, the situation spiraled beyond his control. Meanwhile, inside the chaos, a veteran inmate named Marcus "Slim" Johnson was orchestrating the scene like a chess master. Slim wasn't the biggest or the strongest, but he had something far more dangerous: influence. Inmates deferred to him, even in violent moments, because he had built a reputation over years for strategic thinking and ruthless efficiency. That morning, he spotted an opening, a security flaw in the way the guards had positioned themselves, an unlocked cell door, a blind corner with no cameras. Within seconds, he exploited it. By the time the officers regained control, Slim had moved contraband through the tier, sent a coded message to another inmate in a different division, and subtly shifted the power balance, all without anyone noticing. Fletcher, exhausted and frustrated, understood something crucial in that moment: no amount of training or procedure could compensate for the gaps within Cook County's sprawling system. This incident, though minor on the surface, exposed a larger truth. Division 9 was a microcosm of the jail itself. Every block had a system like this, a hierarchy within a hierarchy, a network of influence that bypassed official authority. The jail might have had cameras, metal detectors, and armed officers, but it lacked control where it mattered most: human behavior. Outside the tier, supervisors reviewed reports, shrugged, and chalked it up to typical inmate behavior. But inside, the inmates were already adapting. The morning fight had shifted alliances, established new rules, and revealed vulnerabilities in a system that was supposed to be airtight. And the ripple effect wouldn't stop there. A fight over cigarettes would escalate into a battle over power, money, and survival, and the consequences would eventually reach the very top of the facility, including the warden himself. In Division 9, one small spark could ignite a firestorm. And today, that spark had been lit. Over the coming hours, Fletcher would watch as other cracks began to appear, doors left ajar, contraband moving freely, guards distracted by procedural paperwork while the inmates orchestrated their own economy. He realized that controlling this environment required more than force, it required insight, strategy, and alliances that he could barely imagine forming. But in a jail of this scale, insight wasn't enough either. Every decision had consequences, and mistakes were expensive. Cook County Jail's security holes weren't just physical, they were social, psychological, and systemic. Division 9 was the perfect example. Every action, every interaction, every whispered conversation had the potential to escalate into chaos. And in a place where thousands of lives collided daily, even the smallest oversight could spiral into disaster. As evening approached, the tension in Division 9 didn't dissipate, it thickened. Inmates prepared for the night shift, strategizing, negotiating, and asserting dominance. Guards prepared for long hours, hoping that their presence alone could maintain a semblance of control. But deep down, both sides knew the truth. Tonight, like every night in Cook County, survival depended on understanding the invisible rules, the ones no manual could teach. And somewhere in the shadows, Marcus Slim Johnson was already planning his next move, exploiting yet another crack in the system. Because in Cook County, the game never stops. And those who play it best, survive. Cook County Jail wasn't just a place where criminals served time, it was a city, and like any city, it had its own economy. Except this one thrived on what society had forbidden. Contraband moved through invisible veins, passing from hand to hand, from tier to tier, orchestrated by inmates who treated smuggling like an art form. From cell phones to drugs, from cigarettes to homemade weapons, every item had a price, and every price had consequences. The system wasn't chaotic, it was meticulously organized. Each tier had its own distributors, its own rules, and its own taxes. If a new inmate arrived with cash or connections, he was quickly assessed, assigned a role, and integrated into this underground market. Some became runners, moving items discreetly between blocks. Others became bankers, storing cash or contraband in hidden caches only they knew about. And at the top were the shot callers, like Marcus Slim Johnson, who didn't just control a tier, they controlled the flow of goods across the jail itself. One officer, who had been stationed in Division 9 for over a decade, once described it as organized chaos with a hierarchy. He explained that contraband wasn't just about convenience or pleasure, it was power. A cell phone could be used to call outside contacts, coordinate legal strategies, or even threaten people on the streets. Drugs could be used to pay off other inmates, secure alliances, or manipulate guards. Cigarettes weren't just currency, they were the glue that held relationships together. The ingenuity of inmates never ceased to amaze and terrify the staff. Makeshift tools, hidden compartments, and clever disguises allowed items to pass undetected. A sandwich could conceal a SIM card. A pair of socks could hide razor blades. Even the most thorough pat-downs were circumvented with creativity honed over years. It wasn't just about smuggling physical items, communication was a commodity, too. Messages were passed using code words, tattoos, or even patterns of behavior. Guards could observe for hours without realizing that an entire transaction had occurred right under their noses. Some officers learned to ignore it, reasoning that as long as it didn't erupt into violence, it wasn't worth confronting. Others tried to crack down, only to be undermined by sheer scale, too many inmates, too many routes, too many hidden pockets. And this economy created its own conflicts. Inmates competed for territory and influence, sometimes violently. Fights could erupt over a stack of cigarettes, a hidden phone, or a minor debt. But beyond the immediate skirmishes, there were strategic battles waged over months, alliances built, betrayals orchestrated, favors remembered. Every action had a ripple effect. One misstep could destabilize an entire tier, forcing guards to intervene or worse, sparking retaliations that lasted days. At night, the jail became even more unpredictable. Lights dimmed, routines slowed, and the invisible economy shifted. Deals that had been dormant during the day were activated. New shipments of contraband arrived from unseen sources, often hidden inside legal documents, food trays, or delivery boxes. The most experienced inmates capitalized on the chaos, moving goods through blind spots in security, exploiting understaffed areas, and coordinating trades that no officer could track. Even the guards who tried to maintain order had to adapt to this ecosystem. Some formed informal understandings with inmates, choosing which battles were worth fighting and which were best ignored. Others rotated strategically, hoping their presence would curb smuggling. But no strategy was perfect. The jail was simply too large, too complex, and too adaptive to ever be completely controlled. One infamous incident from Division 9 illustrates this perfectly. A small shipment of drugs, initially worth a few $100s, was passed through 4 tiers in under 2 hours, using a combination of bribery, deception, and sheer cunning. By the time officers discovered the contraband, the inmates involved were already safely back in their cells, laughing at the system that had tried and failed to stop them. This incident, widely discussed among both staff and inmates, became a case study in how deeply embedded the contraband economy was, and how it exposed fundamental weaknesses in jail security. But this economy wasn't just a threat to guards, it was a survival mechanism. For many inmates, participation meant protection. Those who refused could be isolated, targeted, or coerced. Every transaction reinforced the hierarchy: those with resources had power, those without remained vulnerable. In a place where survival often depended on anticipating the next move, the underground economy was both a shield and a weapon. Cook County Jail's size made regulation nearly impossible. The sheer number of inmates, combined with systemic understaffing, ensured that these networks would flourish. Every attempt to seize contraband, enforce rules, or monitor communications was met with inventive countermeasures. And as technology evolved, so did the methods. Smartphones, makeshift chargers, and hidden SIM cards became the new currency, connecting inmates to the outside world in ways previous generations could only dream of. By mid-morning, Division 9 was calm again, or at least calm on the surface. Inmates moved with purpose, guards walked the tiers warily, and the invisible economy continued its rhythm. But beneath the quiet, deals were being finalized, debts were being collected, and new alliances were being formed. In this microcosm of society, the jail wasn't just a place of punishment, it was a crucible where power, strategy, and survival collided. And somewhere, Marcus Slim Johnson was taking note of every transaction, every whisper, every movement. For him, and others like him, Cook County Jail wasn't a trap, it was a chessboard. And every move had consequences, some of which would reverberate far beyond the walls. Cook County Jail wasn't just a hub for contraband, it was a crucible of desperation. And desperation, when combined with opportunity, has a way of exposing the cracks in any system. Over the decades, there have been countless escape attempts, some daring, some absurd, but all illuminating the vulnerabilities that earned this facility its reputation for massive security holes. Escape at Cook County was rarely about physical strength alone. The walls were high, the fences were electrified, and the towers were manned. The jail wasn't easy to leave, it was complicated. Successful escapes required patience, planning, and a thorough understanding of human behavior. Inmates would study guard patterns, memorize blind spots in camera coverage, and cultivate relationships with staff willing to turn a blind eye or actively assist. Corruption, subtle or blatant, was a reality the jail struggled to control. Bribes, favors, and threats blurred the lines between enforcement and complicity. Some guards rationalized that a small allowance of smuggling kept the peace, others succumbed to temptation, trading access or protection for cash or gifts. In a facility housing thousands of inmates, even minor corruption could create cascading consequences. A single officer's lapse might allow contraband to circulate freely, set the stage for a riot, or provide an opportunity for an inmate to orchestrate a clever escape. One infamous case involved an inmate who, over several months, developed a network of compliant staff and trusted fellow prisoners. His goal wasn't just to flee, it was to create a temporary empire within the jail itself. He stored contraband, coordinated shifts to exploit blind spots, and even manipulated security cameras. The plan was meticulous, calculated down to the minute. But ultimately, it was foiled not by technology or brute force, but by an overlooked detail, a single misplaced keycard. This small slip allowed an officer to enter a restricted area, exposing the entire operation. The inmate's ambition had revealed a fundamental truth: Cook County's systems were only as strong as their weakest link, and in a jail this massive, weak links were everywhere. Escape attempts, however, were far from the only manifestation of systemic weakness. Corruption also showed up in subtler forms. Inmates could trade favors with officers to move between tiers, access contraband, or manipulate the inmate hierarchy. These informal arrangements allowed the most resourceful prisoners to gain power far beyond what official rules would permit. And when those arrangements were exposed, the fallout could be violent, both for the inmates and the officers involved. One particularly audacious plot involved smuggling tools disguised as food service equipment. Over the course of several weeks, inmates received delivery trays containing parts that, when assembled, became a functioning lockpick set. The plan was eventually intercepted, but the fact that such a scheme was even conceivable highlighted a deep structural flaw. The jail's sheer scale and complexity made monitoring every delivery, every interaction, and every corridor virtually impossible. It wasn't just the inmates exploiting vulnerabilities, sometimes the system itself created them. Overcrowding, aging infrastructure, and inconsistent staffing patterns left gaps that criminals, naturally observant and highly adaptive, exploited with alarming efficiency. A blocked camera, an unmanned hallway, or a delayed count could become the difference between order and chaos. And then there was human error. Even the most diligent officers made mistakes. A misplaced set of keys, a forgotten log entry, or a distracted guard could cascade into events that put everyone at risk. Within the walls of Cook County, these errors didn't just create minor inconveniences, they created openings. Openings for contraband, for violence, and, occasionally, for escape. The combination of corruption, human error, and sheer inmate ingenuity created a perpetual cycle. The more pressure the system applied, the more inventive the inmates became. Each thwarted escape led to a new method, each seizure of contraband prompted more sophisticated hiding techniques. Guards were constantly learning, adapting, and surviving in an environment that often felt less like a jail and more like a live-fire exercise. It was in these conditions that the most dangerous games were played. Relationships were constantly negotiated, loyalties tested, and vulnerabilities exploited. Division 9, already notorious for its complexity, became the perfect laboratory for observing these dynamics. Every interaction, every glance, conversation, and transaction was loaded with meaning. Every decision could alter the balance of power. By mid-afternoon, tension was palpable. Officers knew an incident could erupt at any moment, and inmates knew the same. The invisible economy of contraband, the hidden alliances, and the constant surveillance, both official and informal, created a high-stakes environment where strategy and patience mattered more than brute force. And somewhere in the shadows, Marcus Slim Johnson, like many other high-ranking inmates, watched and calculated. Every security hole, every lapse, every whispered rumor about potential vulnerabilities became a piece of the puzzle. For him, the jail wasn't just a place to serve time, it was a chessboard, and each day was a move in a game that could ultimately redefine power within its walls. Cook County Jail, America's largest detention facility, wasn't failing because it lacked rules. It was failing because the rules could never fully account for the ingenuity, adaptability, and audacity of the humans within it. And as night fell, that failure would become increasingly apparent. In a facility as large and complex as Cook County Jail, a spark can ignite chaos in seconds. Overcrowding, frustration, power struggles, and desperation create a volatile mix that can erupt without warning. And when it does, the results are often catastrophic. Riots at Cook County weren't just physical confrontations, they were psychological battles, where every participant, inmate or officer, had to fight for survival and dominance simultaneously. The morning of one infamous riot began like any other. Division 5 was packed beyond capacity, with men pressed into dormitories designed for far fewer bodies. Tensions had been simmering for weeks, disputes over commissary items, fights over tier hierarchy, and the ever-present shadow of gang rivalries. A single incident, a miscount during the morning head count, served as the match to ignite the powder keg. The initial confrontation was small, a verbal altercation between two inmates that escalated into shoves and punches. Within minutes, dozens of men joined, and what began as a fight turned into full-blown chaos. Tables were overturned, chairs became weapons, and officers struggled to contain the melee. Reinforcements were called, but with hundreds of inmates involved, the response was inevitably delayed. In a jail like Cook County, standard protocol is to initiate a lockdown, secure the tiers, control the population, and isolate the instigators. But the size of the facility makes this easier said than done. Communication between guards can be slow or misdirected. Hallways are long, surveillance cameras have blind spots, and the number of inmates often outpaces available staff. In a riot scenario, these vulnerabilities become glaringly obvious. Meanwhile, the rioting inmates exploited every weakness. Doors left unlocked, security cameras offline, and distracted officers provided opportunities to escalate the chaos. Contraband was weaponized, makeshift clubs, sharpened objects, and even chemicals from cleaning supplies were wielded in attacks. The fight wasn't just physical, it was tactical. Experienced inmates directed others, targeted specific individuals, and even orchestrated diversions to gain advantage. On the front lines, officers faced impossible choices. Should they intervene directly and risk injury? Should they retreat to protect themselves and risk losing control? Every decision carried consequences. Many officers relied on quick thinking, teamwork, and sometimes sheer luck to prevent fatalities. Even with riot shields, tasers, and other tools, the sheer scale of the conflict made complete control nearly impossible. What made riots particularly dangerous at Cook County wasn't just the violence, it was the unpredictability. A single inmate could turn the tide, a lone corridor could become a death trap, and the ripple effect of one fight could extend across multiple divisions. The jail's infrastructure, designed decades earlier, was never meant to withstand mass chaos. Old doors jammed, security systems failed, and outdated architecture funneled chaos in ways that magnified its intensity. One officer described a particular riot as like trying to control a forest fire with a garden hose. Every effort to suppress it only revealed another vulnerability, a broken lock, a blind corner, or an overextended colleague. Inmates moved with coordination that staff sometimes struggled to anticipate, exploiting patterns, timing, and knowledge of weak points. After hours of violent chaos, reinforcements from multiple divisions, supervisors, and tactical units finally brought the situation under control. Injuries were numerous: broken bones, lacerations, concussions. Several inmates were transferred to more secure facilities as punishment. Yet, even in the aftermath, the message was clear: the jail was vulnerable. The riot had exposed gaps that could be exploited again, and the damage wasn't just physical, it was psychological. For inmates, riots serve multiple purposes: asserting dominance, settling scores, or demonstrating power to rival factions. For officers, they are a reminder of the precarious balance they must maintain daily. And for the administration, each riot is a public relations nightmare, a legal liability, and a signal that systemic change is urgently needed. But systemic change at Cook County is easier said than done. The facility's size, chronic overcrowding, aging infrastructure, and reliance on human adaptability make permanent solutions incredibly difficult. Every incident, every riot, and every lockdown exposes the limits of control and the lengths to which inmates will go to exploit them. By the evening, Division 5 was eerily quiet. Officers conducted thorough searches, repaired broken doors, and accounted for every inmate. But in the shadows, conversations continued, alliances shifted, and plans for retaliation were quietly forming. Inmates who had survived the riot were already calculating their next moves, learning from every mistake, and exploiting every loophole they had observed. And somewhere, in another tier, Marcus Slim Johnson and his associates were analyzing the day's chaos, considering how to leverage it for future advantage. For them, riots weren't just moments of chaos, they were opportunities. Opportunities to consolidate power, to move contraband undetected, and to assert influence over a system that pretended to control them but never truly could. Cook County Jail had survived another riot, but the cracks had widened. And in a facility of this magnitude, The next spark could be even bigger, more dangerous, and far more consequential. Cook County Jail is more than a facility. It's a living, breathing ecosystem where power, survival, and strategy collide every single day. From overcrowded tiers to invisible economies, from corruptible guards to audacious escape attempts, every corner of this massive complex exposes vulnerabilities that most people could never imagine. What looks like concrete, steel, and razor wire on the outside is, on the inside, a world ruled by influence, fear, and the constant negotiation of survival. The stories we've explored, from Division 9's internal hierarchies to the smuggling networks and riots, are only the surface. Beneath the walls, there are hidden economies, alliances, and conflicts that never make the headlines, yet shape the daily lives of thousands. Inmates like Marcus Slim Johnson are proof that influence and cunning often matter more than strength or status. And the staff, despite their training and dedication, are constantly forced to adapt in a system that's larger and more chaotic than any human being can fully control. What makes Cook County Jail so fascinating and so dangerous is that it exists in a state of constant tension. Every day is a test of human ingenuity, strategy, and endurance. It's a world where mistakes are amplified, opportunities are seized instantly, and the balance of power can shift in seconds. And yet, this is the system that holds thousands of people accountable, that faces scrutiny, and that carries the weight of public trust. The lessons here are both stark and sobering. Control is never absolute, security is never perfect, and in places like Cook County, survival isn't about brute force, it's about understanding the rules, reading the people, and exploiting the cracks that others fail to notice. If this story has opened your eyes to the reality of America's largest jail, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Behind these walls, stories like this happen every day, and we'll continue bringing you the truth from places most people will never see. Because in a jail as vast and unpredictable as Cook County, the chaos never truly ends, and the next story is always waiting.